Oh boy, welcome to issue 23 of the Steve and Cimino Says Boom Show.
Ball.
Hey everyone, welcome to Pop XP. And before the show starts, make sure to click that subscribe button and click the bell to get notifications when we go live and we upload awesome new content. And don't forget, if you can, make sure to share our stream on all your social media outlets. We appreciate it, and thanks for helping us grow the Pop XP channel.
All right, everybody, how you doing? Welcome to the Steve and Cimino Says Boom Show on the Pop XP. I'm your host, John Cimino, with my co-host over here.
That's me.
Steve. Yeah, that's Steve Says Boom. And down below us, we got Niall Scala from Down Under. Niall, tell people what's up, because I don't know what's up. I just know what's going to happen.
I'll tell you what's up. Guys. And you know what? Tonight has me thinking something major. And what is a major event that has happened? I'm talking the Big Bang, right? Something started a universe, right? But there's more to it. There's stardust, there's minerals, there's debris. It comes together to form stars and planets and just so much to be built for the imagination. And guys, tonight you brought on an amazing guest. But before we get into that guest, make sure you look down below, click that subscribe button, and smash the bell to get notifications when we go live and we upload some awesome content like this show tonight. And gentlemen, when I'm talking creating universes, building characters, Steve, John, who do you guys have on tonight?
Oh boy, Steve, before we bring in our guests, we have to remember something. We seem to go about 10 minutes of praise to our guests, and this one we could go on for about 20, 25 minutes. We got to let him speak, Steve.
Hours.
So, Steve, tell me what's happening. Tell me what's happening here.
All right. So we are going to be dealing with one of the innovators of the science of comics. I'm very honored. I've met him before, but now we're going to get into some weeds. So yes, we are talking about the one and only Chris Claremont.
Oh, the vodka hit.
It's time to get to the danger room, Chris.
Oh, please.
Okay, I want people to know, in the Tom DeFalco, Ron Friends episode, I said I was talking in the decades. The 60s, you had Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. The 70s, you had Roy Thomas and John Buscema. And what did I say about the 80s? You had this guy down here and John Byrne that defined a whole new decade that everybody inspired. So, Mr. Chris Claremont, it's an honor to have you. And wow, that's all I got to say. Snicked and wow. What do you say, Steve?
Yes, it's definitely, we've talked about a series of creators. And when it comes to innovation, I'm really looking forward to explaining to people who may not know, especially this podcast is a great way to explain just the impact that Chris made and stuff that people take for granted today. We're going to get into some of the stuff. We're going to dig into some of the weeds and let people know the origins of certain things.
Oh, so Chris, look, before you get into it, before we get into you, what was the comic book that you picked up? I meant into the weeds. Stop thinking. Come on. Kitty Pryde, Peter Rasputin. Come on. What I was thinking of, Chris, though, what was the first comic that you picked up or that you looked at that kind of inspired you that you wanted to get into this field? What was that one that one comic that you can remember.
That inspired me to get into this field?
Yeah.
There was none.
What?
No. My coming into comics as a profession was an accident. But the comic that got me interested in comic book storytelling and the majesty of the field was an English magazine called Eagle.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Which, oddly enough, was created by a Church of England minister. And the series that it was a weekly newspaper for kids. And they had the front page and the last page were full color, which in 1950s terms was like glorious. And the series that got everything off the ground was called Dan Dare, Sky Pilot of the Space Age.
Mm.
By Frank Hampson.
Oh.
Frank Hampson and subsequently Frank Bellamy, which in terms of artists goes, is as high off the ground as one can get. And that was the kind of stuff I would read when this is in elementary school, the very beginnings maybe of middle school. My grandmother would send me the magazine every week. And it was, the text articles were basically instructions to young British Boy Scouts on how to survive in the wilderness. Like once you went beyond your backyard into the backyard of the people next door. But Eagle was, Dan Dare was just magnificent. And then, American comics I'd read when I went to get my haircut, and mostly they were pretty boring. The art was American, I guess. It wasn't impressive in terms of what I was used to. And the stories were very rote until 1967. I guess I was a junior in high school and walked into the local snack bar, and they had a wall of magazines and a rack of comics, and I saw FF48.
Mm.
And I thought, this is cool. And because Stan, Jack, the coming of Galactus is like, wow, Mr. Fantastic hasn't shaved. Well, we're facing the end of the world, Reed. What do we do?
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but I'm going to have a shower and a shave, because if it's the end of the world. And what I still remember is this magnificent panel. I think it was top to bottom of the page, about a half page wide, that Jack Kirby drew of this cop, and might have been a fireman, might have been a civilian. They're looking up at Galactus, who's standing over the Baxter Building, which, bearing in mind it's 1968, was actually tall in New York. Now it would be like minuscule compared to what Manhattan looks like these days.
Right.
And they were talking about, is this the end of the world? And the cop, I don't know, but if anybody can save us, it'll be the Fantastic Four. And of course, I'm sitting there thinking, okay, who? And then they did. And I thought, this is cool. What else do they do? And the next thing I discovered was Thor. And that was really cool. And I said, okay, keep looking around. And the next thing I discovered was Roy and John Buscema's Avengers.
Mm.
And I thought, oh, geez, I'm going to have to earn another $1 so I can. Only 10 cents, remember? And that got me started reading. And then,
can you imagine the gold that was on those shelves? Like when he's saying like those comics that were there, like
don't. The amount of disintegrated paper. I put them on the wall and read them. So they did not last. Although the interesting irony, one of the books I grabbed when I was young was an action comic that came out the beginning of December of '63, where Superman reveals his secret identity to John Kennedy. And that came out the week before the assassination.
Oh, yeah.
And DC pulled every copy, but I had one.
Oh,
and I kept it. And then when I went off to university, my father, being English, decided no more. I didn't need to indulge in this childish hobby anymore. So he disposed of all my comics,
Oh.
as British fathers are fond to do. So, bugger. Let it stand in for words that are far shorter and more pithy. But so as I said, I read comics when I got my haircut, and then Stan and Jack kind of lured me in, and then what happened was my freshman year. Sorry, I'm vamping, but this is the story.
Yeah.
My college, Bard College, shut down for 2 months every spring from New Year's to the 1st of March for what we called field period, which is basically you were meant to go out and get a job related to your interest as a student. And we all figured it was nice thought, but we figured it was basically to save on heat, because Bard was a very small college and a very, we had 400 students, 500 students. And it gets really cold. These were in the days when upstate New York got cold and we actually had snow. So they just threw us out in the real world. But some interesting things could happen as a result. My sophomore year, I spent 2 months and change on a kibbutz, which was really interesting. But my freshman year, I thought, well, what are my interests? Political theory, acting, and writing. Well, let's face it, I'm not a conservative Republican, so the first year of the Nixon administration wasn't going to work. Theater in New York was in January, not very good, so that killed that part. But hey, my parents have a friend, Al Jaffe, who works for Mad Magazine.
Oh, Al.
Maybe Al could get me a job at Mad, and that would be cool because Mad is cool. And apparently Al called my parents and said, "Do you have any effing idea what you do? There's no way in hell I'm going to recommend Chris for a job at Mad." And, but does he have any interest in comic books? And I said, when I heard about it, yeah, sure. Okay, I have a friend. I'll give him a call. He can give you a call, see what happens. Next thing I know, the phone rings and pick up the phone. "Hey there, true believer, it's Stanley." So, I figured, Al Jaffe, when Al Jaffe had a friend, it was a serious friend.
Wow.
And, we had a lovely conversation. And it wasn't until 40 years later that I realized Stan was trying to find a nice way to tell me there's no effing way I can do this. Why? Because we're a very poor company, he said, and we can't afford to actually hire people for whom we pay money. And I said, "Well, sir, I'm really sorry, but I'm actually doing this for college credit. We're not allowed to ask for money." "You're hired." And that's how I got started. And it was interesting because Stan was the editor, was the boss, and Roy was his number two. And that's what got the ball rolling.
Wow.
And the cheap joke is this is when he and Roy and Neil were doing their run on X-Men.
Wow.
And to cut a long story short, they were trying to figure out a way to deal with the Sentinels, and having no idea of, I guess, keeping in my place, I just blurted out, "Well, scientists theorize that mutants derive from solar radiation. So if you want to get rid of mutants, maybe the best idea is to try and get rid of the sun, logically." And Neil comes up with this brilliant splash page of the Sentinels diving into the sun.
Wow.
So I sort of got stuck on the X-Men right off the bat.
Yeah, that's so awesome.
And the double end of the joke is that when I was back at Marvel, when I was actually working at Marvel in 1975, yeah, Len Wein was editor-in-chief. I was his associate editor, and we were it. You know, there were a couple of proofreaders, but it's like the two of us were putting out 45 color books a month.
Wow.
All by ourselves. Yes, we were much more efficient those days than today. But on the other hand, it's like when you're working with both Buscema's, because Jack had gone to the other company at that point.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, there was no need to worry about deadlines, because if you waited an hour, John would turn in another 30 pages. You know, it's like it was a totally different professional environment.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
so again, so Len and I'm at my desk outside of Len's office, and Len and Dave Cockrum were putting together Giant Size #1.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at it and thinking, this is the coolest stuff I've ever seen. You know, and it's like every so often Len would look up from his desk and I'd be sitting there leafing through Dave's artwork, and he'd have to throw me out to my desk. So they were trying to figure out how to deal with Krakoa. And again, without thinking, I said, well, all an island is a really big mountain. So why don't you just cut off the top of the really big mountain and let the Earth's rotation and its revolution around the sun take care of all the rest? So, you know, you wait 5 minutes and the mountain's like 5,000 feet up. Wait 20 minutes and it's out of the atmosphere. Wait an hour and it's like a few thousand miles behind the planet as Earth continues in its orbit. And it's not like islands come with arms to grab hold of anything. And away he went.
Wow.
I thought we would never see him again. Krakoa, I mean. No, but I mean that's literally how it started. And then when Len when he decided to leave as editor-in-chief and realized he could only handle 4 books a month, and X-Men was a bi-monthly, and he wasn't going to be able to do it anymore, I basically, metaphorically, tackled him and said, because the chance to work with Dave Cockrum was just too wonderfully irresistible to pass up.
Oh my God. Yeah, I remember your interviews saying that, how you were always there. You were just waiting behind everyone. But that was one of the greatest gifts, because your legendary run, I mean, let's be honest.
But to be honest, in return, the legendary run almost didn't quite happen.
Oh.
Because 4 years later, John, it was 1980, I guess, John and I were not, I guess, on the best of terms anymore, John Byrne and I.
Yeah.
Because he was pissed that I kept changing details on his plots, on the stories that we worked out. And he didn't like what I was doing with it. I guess apparently one of the bête noirs was, there's Colossus. There's a lovely shot of Colossus straining to pull this tree stump out of the ground. And I figured, okay, it looks like he's having a hard time. I'll write it that way, because I thought that would be cool, that it's not, everything isn't easy, even for Peter. He has to strain, and this is a really stubborn tree. Apparently it wasn't supposed to be a really stubborn tree. John just did it as, you know, he yanks it out of the ground, big deal. And I'd made it a big event. And this is, for John, that was one of the last straws.
Really?
So he went to Jim Shooter, who was editor-in-chief, and said, Chris goes or I go.
Wow.
Assuming that Jim would say, okay, bye, Chris. And Jim's decision was, no, Chris got the book here, helped to get the book here. He stays.
Wow.
And so going into the FF. But the interesting thing from my perspective is, outside of Kitty, everything that I created on the X-Men, but within the Marvel canon, came after that. I mean, at that point, for example, Mystique Rogue, Sabretooth,
Hmm.
Destiny, they were all Avenger. Well, they were actually Ms. Marvel villains, which meant they would have been part of the Avengers canon. It would have been interesting to see where Marvel history, Marvel cinema history, would have gone if John had gotten his way.
Wow.
Wow.
Like
I never knew that.
No, I hadn't
Cool.
either. That's
it's just the crossroads in life. I mean,
Yeah.
Well,
on
go
the
ahead.
other side, it might have turned out to be a total disaster, and I'd be sitting, in a little studio somewhere in Brooklyn or Manhattan, just tapping away at my, oh, maybe they'll buy something this week.
Go ahead, Steve.
Well, it's always funny, like, when you came to the my store and did a signing, and there was a line of people there, and every single book was X-Men, which is understandable considering it's one of the most important things. We'll get into that in a little while, but I don't know if you remember, but the book that I brought up for you to sign was Hulk Annual 5,
Oof.
and
One's
it's
in my, well, you mean the one where fighting the Five? Sorry, the one where Groot's a bad guy.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, and I know that according to the credits, it says that Len plotted and you scripted.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, the sheer fun and the scripting, it's one of my favorite things to read again and again. I just loved the dialogue. I wanted to go a little bit more into that. How did that come about, and was that fun to do?
Well, yeah. I mean, I was going to say the reason it's fun is because Len has a sense of humor and I don't. Theoretically. No, I mean, it's actually, it's knowing one's limitations. I am terrified of humor because I consider that I have a lousy sense of humor, and the worst thing in the world is to try to do a story that one wants to be funny, and there's a forest of banana peels just waiting to be slipped on. Drama is much easier. You just, oh, look, an innocent star, an innocent planet, a hungry superhero. Yum. End of story. It's so to have Len plot out the jokes and me just take advantage of them and try not to trip over them was an absolute delight. But the flip side of it also is that one of the first plots I ever sold Marvel was a Hulk that turned out to be Archie Goodwin's first script for Marvel.
Oh,
And I looked through those pages. It was the second Hulk Jarella story where she comes to Earth. And I just looked at Herb's storytelling, Herb Trimpe's storytelling. And my favorite page is where Hulk's walking through the desert, minding his own business, blissfully unaware of these four little dots in the distant horizon, materializing into these brilliant Herb Trimpe USAF fighter planes.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
No one drew air hardware the way Herb did.
No, he loved that. Yeah.
Blowing him off his feet. And to me, that was just, wow, that's so cool. The kinetic storytelling. I mean, because Herb, bless him, was the last artist working at Marvel who was trained by Jack. And you have to this, and going back to the 2 months I spent working at Marvel, the bullpen, Marvel's offices were the size of they were tiny, comparatively speaking. And we were two floors below the National Lampoon. And every other week we had a bomb threat. Not us, National Lampoon.
Yeah.
I mean, the vicinity. But no, you walk in and there's the bullpen. John Romita, Herb Trimpe, Marie Severin, and Frank Giacoia. I mean, a murderer's row of people. It's right there, and you know, I'd peer over Marie's shoulder to see what she was drawing, and she'd like freak out and want to elbow me in the face. But it's just to see all the stuff come together. You know, to have a moment like the first make ready of Roy and Neil's run on the X-Men comes out as I'm proofreading the end of the fight with the Sentinels.
Wow.
It's just, and you never knew what was going to happen next.
Oh,
And it was just awesome. This is the kind of day where Roy, there was I guess you could say a pilot issue about to go out for a new series. It was penciled, it was inked, it was lettered, it was ready to go. And Roy did the final proofreading and pulled it because it wasn't good. You know, leaving aside the question of how did it get that far in the first place then, but it was watching the function of a creative enterprise, a publishing house, up close and personal. And I mean, the big joke for me is, so I'm sitting there, I'm a young punk, I'm proofreading Captain America, because Jack, even though he was out on the coast then, and he'd just come back to Marvel after trying his luck with the Fourth Universe over at DC, which, to be fair, was absolutely effing brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, DC has been living off the Fourth Universe ever since. But the thing with Jack was, what he was so pissed off with Stan about was that Stan was an absolutely brilliant editor. And he would look at Jack's art and say, okay, leave out this, and this, and then you write the script. Because for Marvel's efficiency, Stan would just sit down and say to Jack, so what do you want to do? You know, what's cool? And Jack would come up with an idea, and they'd talk about it, and Jack would go do it. The Stan Lee method was plots to artists. The art would come to the editor or the writer, and the writer would do a script rather than write full scripts. Because from Stan's perspective, as he always said, I'm too busy trying to save the company to worry about the mundanities. I'm hiring you guys to be a writer. Be a writer. Don't be a pain in my ass. Do good work and get it in on time. 2 out of 3, you can keep your job.
right.
I prefer all 3, but there you go. But it created this synergistic relationship between writers and pencilers that evolved into some of the most brilliant sequences of stories and panels imaginable, whether it was me and John, whether it was Walt Simonson and Walt Simonson, Frank Miller, Denny O'Neil and Frank Miller and Bill Sienkiewicz. It was, you played to the best of both worlds. Whereas with a full script, all you end up getting is the writer's vision of what's happening. And from an editor's perspective, it's absolutely brilliant because everything's on paper and you can throw it out or fix it or change it. But you lose, to me anyway, the opportunity for a kinetic synergy where I can toss a weird idea, a weird image at Sienkiewicz, and what comes back is the Demon Bear.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
It's like,
yeah.
I could never myself imagine the visual sweep of some of the images Bill came up with. But by finding a way to poke Bill, knowing that Bill has the freedom to do whatever he wants. Wow. And to me, that's what makes comics so cool.
Yes.
Being able
Chris,
to do.
speaking of that synergy, it brings me right to my question of X-Men 98, when the first time you show Wolverine's face and then you have the claws pull up. Now, can you pull up that picture? This.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me how that happened, the synergy between you and Dave Cockrum. Like, did he just draw that hair, and then you guys must tell us about creating that Wolverine, the look of what he looks without the costume and the claws coming out of him.
Yeah. Dave designed the character. That was something he and Len had worked out. The claws, though, Len's original concept was, two aspects of it. Len's original concept was that Logan was a kid.
Right.
Like 20. Except that I looked at Giant Size 1 and I said, Dave, that's not a kid. And Dave said, yeah, it's not a kid. So you think, okay. Look at him here. That's not a kid. So we figured, okay. So we went the other way. It's like he's the mysterious older guy. And, that we went from there. The hair, John Byrne actually did a design of Logan when we were building up to removing the hat. Because he was auditioning. This is before when we were.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I remember the picture. It became Sabretooth, I guess.
And it was just a normal Canadian face. And from our perspective as comic creators, it was boring. So we went with Dave's, which is the hair echoes the outfit. But then I'm sitting there, Dave comes in with some pages, and on the back of the page, he just drawn this fist with, Len's original conception was the claws are in the gloves.
Right.
And they just pop out and pop back. And that always struck me as weird as that sound effect. That always struck me as weird because, as with Tony's armor, that means anybody could put on the gloves and be Wolverine, which that's kind of goes against the purpose of being a superhero. So Dave comes in one day and there's a fist and the claws are coming out of the fist. They're actually part of his body. And I took one look at it and said, oh God, that's disgusting. That is so cool. And he and I talked about it, and that was it.
Wow.
And then that evolved. The next question was how'd the adamantium claws get into his body? And that led to the bones, and that ultimately led, I guess, to Hugh Jackman's career.
Oh, absolutely. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, it's really funny listening to you, how the pieces are being put together, and it's very refreshing, in this day and age. And I know that, you've worked in more modern, contemporary arenas when it comes to publishing, how everything is structured, you lawyered up, It's refreshing to see and to hear how it's just happening. You're there, and as you explained, you're there, you've got your creators, and you come in, you see the claws, one idea is leading on to another.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is do you think that's something that can, especially with Marvel and DC, can that happen again, or has that been stifled?
Oh, yeah.
I would love to say it could happen again, but I wouldn't take odds on it.
Mm.
Just to give you another Roy Thomas moment. So we're sitting in the office, all of us young punks on the editorial staff. Roy comes in, it's 5, 5:15, 5:30. And he says, okay, I got an issue, it needs to be written. I got to have it by 8:45 tomorrow morning. Who wants it?
Oof.
I got my hand up first. And it was a Daredevil that Jerry Conway had plotted and was drawn, and Jerry couldn't do it, couldn't write it. But here's the thing. It's 5:30. You have 8 hours, maybe 14 hours to write it. It's got to be in by 8 the next morning. If you don't do it, the world won't come to an end. You'll just never get a shot again. That was the deal. So, I ended up doing pretty much an all-nighter. I brought it in the next morning, gave it to him, and it was good enough so that the next time I got another shot. But that's the dynamic. We were a publishing house. You hit deadlines. The thing I find most, and I say this as someone who's in the process of blowing a deadline himself, amazing sort of things. Blowing a writing deadline can be blamed on surgery on one's foot. No, that's my writing foot. But no, seriously though, we were all totally aware, as Stan's mantra was, that we are on deadline. You can't screw this up. You can do a bad issue, and as Archie Goodwin would always say, great, you've got 30 days to fix it, but you had to get the issue in. Mm. If you don't get the issue in, then you've got all these people queued up outside of the comic book shop, really pissed off. Now, I don't know if it's more laissez-faire or it's just the nature of the beast, but on one side of the equation, it's a much more writer-centric publishing arena, both at Marvel and DC. But on the other half of the equation, you lose, or it seems to me that one loses the ability of exploiting the potential of synergism. Mm-hmm. If you're working with a really great artist, I mean, 15 years ago, when I was working with Chris Pacello on X-Men, the stuff that was coming in for me was just awesome, and I was looking forward to years, I hoped, of being able to play with him and come up with not simply new characters, but new ways of telling stories that would keep the readers on the edge of their seat. It didn't work out that way, but that's the hope that I think every creator, writer, or artist should come into this mix wanting to do, is how to find the right person to team up with and have as much fun as ever.
Yeah, but Chris, it's perfectly what you said. Steve said it the best. You are the guy that basically created the modern superhero storytelling. Everything after like the Dark Phoenix saga, it really did. Everything, those big scope stuff you see that came years after, it's all trying to be what you did. And that's without a doubt. But I have to point out, in X-Men 132 and then to X-Men 133, that cliffhanger when you had Wolverine coming out of the swords, which is one of the greatest cliffhangers of all time. And then you have it going into 133 where Wolverine does his first solo, and he basically becomes the star of the Marvel Universe, the darling of the Marvel Universe, if you say you did that. But you're the guy that everything you just said right there, you refined the Jack Kirby, Stan Lee, Roy Thomas, John Buscema, and all those other guys, and refined it what it is today. And that synergy, everything you're talking about. No, I mean, without a doubt. I'm just saying.
The build up after the Big Bang. That's what I was saying.
You probably get a totally different response from John.
Oh, wow. Not. I thought you meant Buscema for a second, but Byrne.
No, nice try. No. John Byrne. I mean, because that was part of. I mean, those that run of stories was what led to John deciding he didn't want to do this anymore, with me anyway. Simply because, I mean, we were cutting and pasting up, down, right, left, and center. I mean, I've been looking at someone online who's apparently grabbed a chunk of stuff out of my archives at Columbia University, or visuals of stuff. And in that are the notes where there were stories that were originally crafted as one-part stories that we decided to break into two, or I decided to break into two, that we had to stretch things, rush things, all to build up to 137. And that was a double issue. And even that wasn't the end of the story. You know, I mean, the cheap response is creators plan, God laughs. But that's it. No matter how meticulously one tries to get all the ducks in a row, there's inevitably one duck who gets up and says, no, I'm a swan, I'm going this way. Mm-hmm. And then you have to, oh, wait, he probably is one. Oh, dear. And then what? The thing I find most frustrating about the much more heavily structured reality of modern publishing is there's no room for the flash of inspiration that suddenly makes you go, whoa. You know, I mean, bluntly, the whole reason that Dark Phoenix ended up going the way it did was because John had this idea, oh, Jean blows up, eats Debari. Okay. And then he drew an inhabited planet.
Yeah.
Well, because it's the rule of unintended consequences. Jean had no awareness of the lesser universe. It was just, I am Phoenix, or Dark Phoenix at this point. I'm hungry. I'm going to eat this star. The fact that there were 6 billion people on the 4th planet from that star was as irrelevant to her as walking down a street and seeing an anthill. For us, I mean, unless of course they're, you know, predatory ants, in which case you're in deep trouble, Texas ants. But no, I mean, it was a cool bit, but then you have to deal with the consequences, which is what Jim Shooter confronted us with in 137. We thought everything was clear. We'd had approvals up and down the board, and it turned out not so much. And then we had to face the consequences of the moment. Facing those consequences turned out to be the best resolution imaginable for that arc and the most heartbreaking story. But sometimes that's the way creative synergies work. Mm-hmm. You drive down the road and think, I'm going to turn right, turn right, turn right. Oh, I'll turn left. And that takes you into a whole new different direction, reality, consequences, evolutions. But to me, that's what made all this fun. And I guess partly because I'm not the 30-year-old kid I was, I find the current way the industry likes to structure itself more challenging.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wow. It seems to me that without the bullpens, right, having the actual offices and the studios where the writers and the artists were working with the editors, it seems like you lose that ability to really kind of bounce off one another. You know, I look at today's way, it's very remote. You know, if I'm editing something, it's just it's emailed to me. It's transferred to me. You know, if I'm looking at this image or that image, like we don't get to sit around and powwow and really create. And I feel like, you know, maybe that was the process of, you know, yesteryear and whatnot, but it just seemed it just makes sense though, right? It's just a great way to bounce off one another.
Well, I guess a way of looking at it is that Marvel used to be like a TV writer's room.
Yeah.
Where you've got everybody in the room, writers, artists, everything else. I mean, but that's the reality of business now.
Yeah.
Nobody lives. It used to be that everybody had to live within 30 miles of New York because the checks were drawn from a New York bank. And if you lived in New Jersey, if you lived in Connecticut, you were sort of screwed because it would take 2 weeks for the check to clear.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so you had to live in New York. You had to have a New York bank. You went out of the office, you deposited your check in the New York bank, and now you know you could write checks to all the places that you needed to when you got home. Jack moving out to the coast was the first he was the first creator to break that paradigm.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, yeah, it used to be great to be able to go over to Paul Levitz's apartment on Friday or Saturday and play poker. We all sat around, we all, showed off art, showed off stories, kicked ideas back and forth. It was a lot of fun. But once, as people got older, as technology changed, I mean, the flip side of the coin is that the end of Dark Phoenix occurred literally the week that the book was supposed to go to the printer. So everybody thought they knew that the final issue was coming, but once as we were doing it, as we were changing it and sending it to the printer, nobody knew that. When Fate of the Phoenix hit the stands, everybody was like, "What the?"
Hell yeah!
And then the next issue, when the next issue turned out not to be Scott and Jean by a lovely little pond.
Yeah.
With Jean apparently like a semi-idiot because she'd been, brain wiped by the Shi'ar. But she and Scott were going to live happily ever after. That was where we were going. That was where everybody thought we were going. And then now suddenly we had Jean's funeral. Mm-hmm. And even after that, for the next couple of issues, nobody believed it was real. And then, of course, we did Days of Future Past, and you thought that was scary. Take a look at this.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, but there was no social media. There was nobody really looking over your shoulder. We actually got 3-dimensional letters. People wrote stuff on paper and put it in the mail, and the post office would deliver it. And X-Men would get 125 letters an issue. That's so cool. Now it's like 50 blog posts, if you're lucky to find wherever they're being written. On one level, the breadth of reach. Wow, I've got an email from some guy in Kuala Lumpur or some person in Kuala Lumpur. That's really, really cool. But for me, that's what makes conventions valuable, because for me to go to a convention and sit there and be at my table for 10 hours straight signing is extraordinary. That people are willing to stand in line for hours to get their books signed, and I make it worse because I sort of insist on talking to everybody, because like if you're going to stand in line for 5 hours, the least I can do is, talk to you, because I've seen and been on queues where stands up on the dais and you've got like 300 people queued up for the 2 hours he's available to sign, and it's just Stan's charming, but you're there in front of him, for 30 seconds, and you're gone, and the next person and the next person and the next person. It's an assembly line. I feel, it's like if you're going to wait for me, I've got to be there for you. But at the same time, that is really cool.
Yeah,
it is.
that's why you're awesome, Chris. I mean, I know that I don't want to say it like, but like that is why. No, seriously.
No, you see, 3 years ago, back before the world went to shite, Beth and I are in Moscow. And Moscow, Idaho? No, the Moscow. Where I've got a photograph of me next to a statue, an iron foundry vision of Logan. And it's Hugh Jackman.
That's cool.
But
Wow.
I'm 3 kilometers from the effing Kremlin. I mean, that's ridiculous, and that's cool.
Oh,
and
so cool.
Much fun. But the point here is that, so I'm doing a signing at this like one-day convention, and it turned into like 4 or 5 hours. They finally threw us out when they had to close the building. But when I've got like hundreds of people, of Russians, young men, young women mostly, which is really interesting, because the one hallmark of the X-Men, of my X-Men, was that it had a huge, like a third of its audience were women.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And I thought that's cool. But when you're talking to someone through a translator who's in tears because she loved Jean Grey and the fate of the Phoenix was heartbreaking for her. But the only way I can, that's so cool.
Oh yeah.
So impressive. That's so ridiculously wonderful. It's like someone should have gotten Vladimir Putin hooked on it. No, but I mean, the cheap jokes aside, it's to have that kind of impact. At this point, after 40 years, how can you not try to be equally determined, equally respectful,
of course,
of the current audience, to do, my job is to do my best to get the same sort of reaction out of them or their children or their grandchildren, thank God, as I did then. Because that's what, to me, that's what publishing, that's what telling stories, that's what telling these stories has been all about, is to get the reader to sit on the edge of their seat and go, what the heck happens next?
Well,
and you change the world.
The segue is, and you did broach it a little bit here with the amount of females that you had reading your comic, the X-Men, and it wasn't like I was reading X-Men 1. I wasn't reading the Dark Phoenix saga off the stands. The first issue of X-Men that I ever picked up was issue 183. So I'm coming to the game late.
Yeah.
Very late. That's the issue where, of course, Juggernaut and Colossus are having a fight.
Oh, the bar fight.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
my first issue too. Yeah.
I'm totally lost. But the one thing I did notice immediately was it was a different tone to every other comic that I was reading at the time. And there was like a cult following, in the comic shop. There were people that were buying the mutant titles and they weren't buying anything else. And, I had been buying everything else, but I hadn't been buying the X-Men. And I remember there was one rather arrogant person at the shop was like, well, if you're not reading this, you're not at the cutting edge. And I was like, oh, okay, well, let me start reading some mutant stuff then.
It was Alan Davis, right?
But there was definitely a different feel. There was a different audience. And I every time I went to the comic shop, I would stand there just to the side and see who was going up in line. And I would look over and see what books they were putting down on the counter. Okay. I've always been very aware of things like that. And I would notice there was a demarcation line. People who were buying the X-Men, they weren't buying the Avengers. Mm-hmm. It was a strange little thing, but the X-Men fans were the most fanatical people I had ever met.
I
They were like,
know.
well, I get my X-Men. Oh, I've got my New Mutants. I've got this. I've got that. And well, what? And I would say, but are you reading this? And they go, that's too low for me. Too low brow. So, and that's what segues quite nicely into what I was saying. Your work did evolve after, obviously the separation with John. It evolved, and you were able to capture an audience that no other creator had been able to grab. That large female audience, and that resulted in incredible print runs, incredible amount of people who are like, I'm reading this book. Wait a minute, I broke both my legs. I'm going to the comic shop. Okay. Yeah. And to this day, especially that 86, 87, 88 era, there was those X-Men fans were rabid.
I know.
Rabid. And the thing is that they couldn't get that type of story in another book. And I know John agrees with me. For me personally, I was more of an action-orientated, the Roger Stern Avengers and stuff like that. But I did notice the difference. And that's why I wanted to explain to people that your work had evolved and got to a certain level where other writers were like, well, wait a minute. What is Chris doing? How is he getting an audience that I've never been able to tap into? And that's what I wanted to get across here on this podcast about the sheer innovation, the skill, and the ability to bring a level of realness to the comics. You were dealing with fantastic concepts, yes, but those inter-panel connections and dialogue that you had between the characters was appealing to your X-Men fans that they couldn't get anywhere else. And I hope that I'm able to express that well enough to you.
Well, yeah, that goes back to the fight between Juggernaut and
Colossus.
I mean, why did this happen? Because it was right after Secret Wars, and Colossus had gone away to Secret Wars and had met this mysterious alien Zaji and had fallen for her, and then she died. And so the first thing he does is he comes back and leaving aside the fact that while this was happening, Kitty had gone through the Kitty Wolverine miniseries, which had a few traumatic moments of its own for her. If you ever catalog the things I did to this 13-year-old, I would blush. Not to mention probably be thrown into the hoosecow. But so he's telling all this to Kitty. In the process, he's breaking her heart. And because he's a boy and B, a Russian, he doesn't have a clue. And so this is where Logan decides to take him out for a night on the town.
Yeah.
And Nightcrawler goes with him because otherwise he wants to make sure that no one gets killed in the process.
Yeah.
Changed my life, Steve. I mean, Chris, that interaction with Kitty and Peter with the beautiful drawings. When I was a kid, that changed my life. It was so incredible. I was Kitty Pryde in a relationship, and my girlfriend at the time was Peter. I related. I'm just saying, you changed my life with that. It was so incredible. No, a really quick question, Chris. Did you ever get asked to write like a teen? You could have written like a teen novel. If you take the superheroes out, you could still write that because you could write relationships so freaking good.
Well, any publishers, I'm still working. No, but I mean, the whole point was good. That, in the process of going to the bar, they run into Juggernaut. Yeah. And all Juggernaut wants to do is have a drink and meet a girl and have a good time. And then this idiot spills his beer.
Yeah.
Makes him spill his beer. And then it turns out he's Colossus. And one thing leads to another. And it's the rule of unanticipated consequences. None of the, because bear in mind, Colossus is only like 20 at the oldest. So, I mean, we're definitely skating on thin ice in terms of the bar part. And he gets, when all is said and done, and Juggernaut has courteously left a fairly impressive wad of cash to the bar owner as an apology. Peter's furiously upset. Why didn't any of you come to my aid? And Logan's, yeah, I mean, like, you came to Kitty's?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
you know, we are not isolated pieces in this puzzle. We are a team. We are friends. We are meant to be together, which means we listen to you and you listen to us. We see what's bothering you. You see what's bothering us. We take responsibility for each other because we are in a reality where each of us depends on the other for our lives and for the lives of innocents around us. It's not all about us.
Right.
It's all about the bigger us. And I think the fun for me was, and the one thing that made my head explode when it happened was, quite bluntly, I find grown-ups boring. For me, the joy as a writer is dealing with the 10 years between puberty and getting out of university, where everything is new. And because it was the 80s, if you screw up, you get a second chance. You know, it is a learning curve. And you can have a normal, smooth curve. You can have one that's bumpy as hell. You can fall off. You can drag yourself back on. You can save someone. You can push someone off. All the possibilities are there, but it's a learning curve.
Yeah.
The difference between Reed and Sue is that they're grown-ups. They're grown-up kids. They are the token grown-ups. Family in the Marvel Universe. The X-Men, not so much. But they're at least a big step above the New Mutants, who are officially in there to learn, except for Kitty, who's pissed off at that.
Yeah.
You know, but the point is that for me, that those points of experimentation, those points of being able to make a mistake, of just having something so silly as the backup story that Dave Cockrum and I did for the reprint of, I guess, Giant Size #1, where it's just, for those of you who've never read the X-Men, Kitty and Illyana will now tell you everything you need to know while exploring the mansion, but because it's a story and it actually has to have a point and an ending. What's the ending? It's a surprise party for Kitty. And Illyana's been like keeping her out of the way while they got everything set up. As opposed to the surprise party in Iron Fist, where Aurora, much to her dismay, gets a giant bowl of egg salad in her face. So I think this is why what pissed me off was, you know, because I had all this stuff envisioned in Excalibur that I wanted to do, and then Alan left the book, and it's amazing how Alan Davis left the book, and it's amazing how instantly all the fun went out of it. It was like that was a book that was created as a synergy for the two of us, and then without him, it just went away. But then a subsequent writer wanted to get Kitty involved with Pete Wisdom.
Oh, yes.
And it was pointed out that even in the UK, having a 16-year-old involved with a 30-year-old is, what's the word? Oh, rape, structurally speaking, or at least illegal.
Yeah.
So he instantly made her 21.
Oh.
which, and I tried to unmake it when I came back as a boss, but too late.
Yeah.
But the point is that, to me, those are the wonder years, those 10 years. And looking at the new stuff today, I think all the enthusiasm with which new characters have been created can lead to all sorts of interesting potential possibilities. Ms. Marvel being one of them.
Yeah.
But for me, it's always been about trying to find a way to have fun.
Mm-hmm.
And I figure if I'm having fun telling the stories, if I'm creating characters who relate to themselves and the audience in ways that are read as fun, if I have an audience who's willing to queue up on the third Thursday of every month to be the first ones in the store to grab the damn book, yes, even if they are a tad solipsistic and a tad arrogant, at least they're arrogant about my stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the other side of the equation is that the joy then of having to work under the aegis of the Comics Code meant if we wanted to be naughty, we had to think about it. We had to find a way to present it so that it wasn't obvious, so that one could actually read it at 12 or 13 or 14. Bearing in mind, this is 20th century, 12, 13, 14. They're not as knowledgeable as they are now.
Right.
You get one set of responses. Ideally, this is a really cool story. Maybe not so cool as Iron Man or the Avengers, but cool. But then when you come back and read it at 20, it's a different story.
Yeah.
When you come back and read it at 35, it's a different story again. So it grows with you and stays with you and gives you interesting things to talk about, ideally when one hands it off to one's kids. But it's a wider embrace of readers. And I think that's not a bad thing. It challenges the writer to try and stay in tune with the audience, but it also challenges the audience to perhaps pay a little more attention and not take everything for granted.
Absolutely. And Chris, and with that, I know we're a little over your time and stuff, but you changed the world, Chris, and exactly what you're saying is beautiful because it printed on the paper, though. I mean, everything you said, you got to show it, and every great artist wants their work to outlive them, and that's forever. And you, like the true royal legends, you, Roy, Stan, Jack, you're part of that, and you're part of the way the world is today, and you made it a better place. And that's why we made this podcast, is to show respect to you guys that a lot of people don't know today. And you guys, we celebrate that because we love what you did. I love you, Chris. I love what you gave me, and you made, for better, for worse, you made me.
Well, the joke is not done yet. Don't use past tense.
Oh no,
present tense, damn it. That's I think that's the joy about storytelling. The joy about writing is that it is not bound by any restriction but one's ability to actually do the work. If I can come up with a great idea, I can put it down on paper and, please God, try and find an artist who can visualize it and then browbeat an editor into publishing it. Mm-hmm. But there's no limit to, there's no mandated off switch. In a regular job, one can you know, you run into a point where they say, sorry, we're moving on to the next person and the next generation. You know, with a writer and with an artist, you can keep trying till you get it right. And as I said, hopefully there'll be an audience who is willing to give it a shot. But even if the sales are not what one would ideally expect, the fun of it will keep you interested. And, you know, as I said, Archie would say, okay, you screwed up, you got 30 days to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
And who knows what can happen in those 30 days, where it'll go. You know, as I said, John Byrne did some brilliant work on the FF. If the switch had gone the other way, you know, who knows? Might have been just as good for both of us. Might have been more fun in different directions. It might have led to outcomes, destinies, directions that none of us foresaw. But the fun about comics, the absolute drop dead kick in the butt fun about comics is one gets to constantly reinvent oneself in terms of what will these characters do next, and B, one can just have a hell of a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And how often does anybody get a chance to say that about their life's work?
No. It's a blessing when you can, that's for sure.
Knock wood.
And with that, Steve, any last words for Mr. Claremont?
Well, for me, I just wanted to try to express to people, especially any youngsters that are watching this podcast and they're taking, certain things for granted. I just wanted to let them know that there's a line that goes back in the way that stories are crafted today. Okay. Mm-hmm. That line goes back, basically to Chris. And then if you go a little bit before that, of course, people like Denny O'Neil. Mm-hmm. But basically, I wanted to let people know who are the originators of the story craft and techniques that we have today. Okay. It's not like a golden age book where, suddenly the Human Torch is flying off to Venus. Okay. It's not like that. This stories that are taking place on multiple levels. And what Chris said was exceptionally important about one's comic story appealing to different age groups at different times. You grow into it. Then you read the story again after 20 years and you're like, oh, that's what was going on. That is genius. That's a genius level. And that Absolutely. No one can do that anymore because they don't have to. You can go and do an independent book. Even if you're working for Marvel and DC, you can do stuff now which is extremely gratuitous and, and be lazy in many ways. So for me personally, I'm hoping and praying that I get to showcase the skills and the reason behind certain things and the writing and the craft. That's what I want to get through. And I really thank Chris for being here and really explaining it in a beautiful, clear fashion.
Niall, you got last things to say to Mr. Claremont?
Yeah, I do. My generation, my big introduction to X-Men, I knew they existed, but my big introduction to X-Men really was the animated series. And when it got to, the Dark Phoenix saga, I researched it more, right? I was like, oh, this is really cool. There has to be more to it. And then my local comic shop introduced me to it. And then when I went to Walden's Books, if you guys remember, when we had a bunch of different bookstores around, I started picking up the trade paperbacks and I started reading more. And you actually picked up on a very key word. And it's something that I started to do. So I started to pay more attention. I started to realize that the cartoon was cool, but these comics are better. And I started getting back further and further. And I had a point where I was like, okay, I've gone back really far, to Stan Kirby and, all that stuff. And I was like, oh, these are cool, but I'm getting more out of, you know, the 80s books and stuff like that. I'm getting a lot more out of the characters, a lot more out of the story. And I'm paying attention to them. I'm falling in love with Colossus. You know, I'm like, whoa, this guy's amazing. How come he's not here? And, you know, I'm being introduced, you know, Nightcrawler. This is so cool. But the thing is now my friends were getting into it, right? Now we're all buying the back issues. We're all buying the back issues. And to this day, and I won't knock anyone in you know, modern, you know, today's comics and everything. There's a certain style, there's certain things involved in why we create what we do. But I feel like nothing compares to that time. Those books grow with you, like you said. I can go read that book right now and I'm like, great. I can literally pick a book off the shelf right now, read it once and be like, I'm just reading that once. You know, because there is a great mix of action and dialogue, character development. You know, they were having a problem as a group that my group of friends had, you know, so it was like, oh my God, I relate with the X-Men. A whole universe created. I always look at Onslaught, right? And, you know, you had the X-Men Onslaught and then you had the Marvel Onslaught because the X-Men developed into such a universe of their own. And it's all thanks to you, Chris, and what you guys did to actually give depth to the characters. I'm not saying past creators didn't. You guys just brought something else. The chemistry was right. You know, and it was just a perfect mixture, something that I haven't seen recreated in today's environment.
And in
so
last,
thank you.
Before you go, Chris, and before you, I'll have you obviously go ahead, Chris. Go ahead.
I just want to say, but the other thing is, it's not. I am happily taking all the praise, but
So
the other thing to bear in mind is it's a synergy.
Correct.
And
Absolutely.
the extraordinary thing about my career is the sheer quality and variety of the artists I've had the phenomenal good luck to work with. You know, the 5 different, you know, I've worked with as many Johns as there are oh God, as there are Chris's in movies now, you know, between Byrne, Bolton, Romita Jr., and Hemsworth. And sorry, that was a cheap joke that failed. This is why I don't go for humor. But no, the point is that I've had, when you're working with Frank, when you're working with Walter, when you're working with Olivier Capel, when you're working with Salvador La Roca, when you're working with Alan Davis, I want to give them stories that they're excited about drawing. But at the same time, I mean, one of the jokes was that when Frank Miller and I were doing the Wolverine, he would design the pages with big chunks of white space because Claremont likes to write. You know, let's give him lots of dead space that he can fill with words. And I'm flipping through this and looking at it and said, shit, I'm not covering that up. That's beautiful. No, but the point is that, you know, for that issue, for that series, my plot for the first issue was 20 pages. The plot for a 20-page story. But for the last issue, it was Frank and me talking on the phone for 20 minutes, me scribbling notes that when I typed them up were a half page. And that was it. Why? Because the first issue was me giving Frank everything I thought he could possibly need to understand the character, the setting, the reality, why things are happening. And as Walter Simonson said to another artist who was saying, look at all these words. How the hell am I going to know what to draw? And Walter said, yeah, Claremont likes to write. But if you actually look at each page, there are only 4 or 5 or 6 maybe images, visual images. That's all you need. Same with Frank. By the time we got to the 4th issue, he didn't need to know any of the backstory. We were on the same page in that respect. All we had to agree on was what was going to happen. Boom, boom, boom. And that was that.
Wow.
It's the joy of working in a synergy is that you can both learn each other's strengths, weaknesses, tricks, ways of telling story, ways of how can we best convey the information visually. Whereas if one's writing a full script and one has no idea who is going to draw it, one tends to throw in everything just to make sure there are no loose ends.
Mhm.
And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. One last thing, because I can never shut up. So Frank Miller comes into the office one day, back in the days when we could actually hang out in the offices. And Denny O'Neil, who's editing Daredevil, Frank's writing and drawing it at that point, says, there's a problem. we need a rewrite on the last panel. It doesn't quite work. And Frank's sitting there and Denny's like, Frank's just sitting. Oh. And before Denny can react, Frank pulls out an eraser and erases the entire panel. And Denny goes, oh, what have you done? And Frank goes, oh, the words are fine. The art was wrong.
Wow.
And so he just drew a new panel. That to me is what made comics so much fun.
Oh,
Yeah.
What makes comics so much fun is that as a creator, the act of creation can be a gas, can be an adventure, can be a treat,
oh,
can be something that for us is as exciting as the reader to read it, because it's a synergy of two creative talents and seeing what happens next.
oh.
And I guess the sad part for me is the evolution of things, because it ends up, because it's more convenient from a publishing standpoint, one can lose that moment of magnificent effervescence.
Oh, wow.
And it's, that's the reality of the world that is. But damn, it used to be so much fun.
Oh my God. It makes me almost
admit.
want to cry, Chris. Basically, me and Steve started this podcast because of the passion. You, in your own calm demeanor, exude so much of that it's like when you talk, sometimes I start to tear up because I know what you're talking about. And and we're the people on the other side that read that stuff. And it's such a refreshing to hear you say how you felt about it, making it, and then giving it to people like me, this little kid that wanted to dream. You made me dream big, and it was just amazing. And really quickly, I'd like to thank everybody for watching. The legend, Chris Claremont, thank you so much for being here. A hidden gem really quick. Marvel Team Up number 79. Oh my God, Chris, that was so unbelievable. You put Spider-Man in Red Sonja. Oh, look at that one. Oh my gosh. Got to throw there. So what an issue. And one more thing I want to say.
Work.
In one of your co-creations, I have to throw this out. Gladiator changed my life. The Imperial Guard, Smasher, Gladiator. Oh my God. Just want to say, with Dave Cockrum designing all that, legendary. So thank you. I'm thanking you for those issues because, oh my God, I was more of a spaz back then than now, if you can't believe that, Chris.
Well, the unknown story about that was it was supposed to be a two-part story where you saw the X-Men versus the Imperial Guard in X-Men, and then Paul Levitz was going to do the Legion of Superheroes versus the Y guys.
Okay.
On his, but Dave was not as efficient on producing the book as he needed to be, and by the time we got that out, Paul was like 7 years ahead of us. So that's why the team up never happened.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for being here. I mean, it's an honor to have you here. And thank you. And your stories and your passion, unparalleled. Oh, you and Roy Thomas, kids forever. You don't look like kids, but you were kids forever.
I don't look like a kid. Oh, Yoski. The pleasure was mine. The treat was mine. Thank you very much for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you. So, Steve, gonna get us out of here as our world mighty mystic millionaire?
You know what? What a great time we had. Boom!
Boom.
Hey everyone, thank you for joining us on Pop XP. If you haven't already, make sure to click that subscribe button and also click the bell for notifications when we go live and we upload some awesome new content. Also, don't forget to head on over to Twitter and follow us at the Pop XP and over on Instagram at the Pop XP. Thanks again everyone, and we'll see you soon.